So I'm a ENT and sleep medicine specialist in Houston, and I started a private solo practice 6 months before the pandemic started. And as an ENT, we see a lot of respiratory issues. We see a lot of people that just come in with, sinus infections, and we see people that have the flu, that sort of thing. So when COVID hit, I started seeing COVID patients, and we had access to a saliva test for COVID, which made our little clinic popular because people could avoid the swab. And so we were doing that, and then they would test positive, and I would say, okay, well, go talk to your primary care doctor about treatment. And they'd come back to me and say, well, my primary care doctor said don't do anything. And I started seeing sicker and sicker patients. And initially I just gave them breathing treatments. I didn't know what to do, or occasional steroid and antibiotic. And then monoclonal antibodies came out. And so I started giving those, and those worked really well. Patients would turn around 24 hours later and feel a lot better. And then the government started rationing monoclonal antibodies, and it became harder and harder to get them. And so that's when I started looking at alternatives. And the first alternative that I started using was ivermectin. And honestly, I was worried about using it because I'd had such good luck with monoclonal antibodies. I was worried it wasn't going to work. But I found that, and not always ivermectin solo, usually in combination with other things, but I was able to keep everybody out of the hospital using, we call it multi-drug early treatment. And everybody, I've treated now over 6,000 COVID patients, and everybody that has had early treatment is alive and well.
So you're one of the frontline doctors, effectively. And as anybody in the front line of battlefield, you've been tremendously rewarded, given medals, right. Applauded by the federal government. I just can't imagine the accolades and laudits you've received as a result.
Yes, it's been wonderful. Right. No, I got attacked. Basically, I had privileges at a hospital called Houston Methodist, and I was very loosely affiliated with them. I'd actually never stepped foot in that hospital since getting privileges. You just have them as a just in case.
Right, courtesy kind of thing for insurances.
Yeah, well, and I'm an ENT, and we operate, so you have to have a hospital to send patients in case something goes wrong. So that was a situation, and I started speaking out because I was doing testing. I was able to see that the vaccine wasn't working, because I would see all these patients coming in who were vaccinated and were just as sick, if not sick.
So now we're talking about 2021.
Summer of 2021. I was under the radar until that point. People in Houston knew about me because I was doing all the monoclonal antibodies. But then Houston Methodist, I started speaking out on Twitter about vaccine mandates. I said vaccine mandates are wrong, because Methodist was the first business in the country to mandate the vaccine for its employees. And that was in June of 2021. And I had all these people coming to me very distraught because they were very nervous about this shot that had no long-term data, and they had to choose between that and their jobs. So I started speaking out about that. I started saying things like ivermectin works. I was pretty conservative at the time. And they went after me. They suspended my privileges, and the way that I found out was through a reporter. So they went to the Houston Chronicle and told them that they were suspending my privileges for spreading dangerous misinformation. And then they went on Twitter and tweeted a thread about me being dangerous and harmful to the community and all that. Then the media came after me. It was a media storm. And to address that, I had a press conference to try to, fight back. And then right now we are in a legal battle over defamation for what they did. Apart from that, I've had now 4 complaints to the Texas Medical Board about me. None from anybody that was harmed. And one of them
are the complaints from your patients?
One was from, so I talked to the father and a stepmother of a 17-year-old child, and they wanted to have ivermectin on hand while they traveled to Europe. And the mother, who I didn't talk to, reported me. And that one was dismissed. But that was, 18 months of, and thousands of dollars in legal
No, I
fees.
understand. There's this particular kind of there's like a medical complaint board, attorneys bar of certain, only certain lawyers in Massachusetts, I assume there, will do complaints in front of the board, and they have a certain premium to their price because they're specialized.
Yeah. So that one's been dismissed, but I have three others. Two are from hospitals. One is from a pharmacist, and both basically over ivermectin.
Right. So they're not really complaints about your general medical care. They
No,
are specific, they're almost political complaints in a way. They're part of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times.
right, right. They're not what you typically see because we get a monthly email, public shaming all the doctors have been disciplined by the medical board, and it's things like sexual misconduct and
Right.
drugs and
Yeah,
alcohol.
felony level things, one
Right.
way or another, or huge, gross incompetence.
Gross incompetence, right?
Yeah, you're doing your surgery, but you head down to the ATM 5 miles away to bet on, the races or something like that, and then you come back. Um, there are cases like that. Frankly, a lot of those, drug. I've unfortunately, come into contact with the Board of Registration, and a lot of the cases, if you have something like, oh, I was on drugs, they're actually far more lenient than if it's something
Yeah.
quasi-political with which they disagree philosophically.
Yeah, they try to rehab you and get you.
Yeah, there's a whole re-education aspect to it, which I find rather unsavory and Maoist, but that's just me. Now, at one point you said earlier in the discussion, you said I was conservative. Do you mean that politically or conservative in terms of being careful about medication? What did you mean by that?
Careful about what I said publicly. I was cautious. I wasn't like compared to now. I'll say basically whatever I think, but back then I was, I just.
Right. So I'd like to come back to the monoclonal antibody point, but I'm going to do that later, just as a kind of a memory bookmark. But I kind of want to go over what's been going on. I just have a few windows we can touch on. You can talk about any of these. This is from MedPage. Medical board files complaint against Mary Tyler. It's Bowden. Bowden. I keep getting it wrong. Bowden. Okay. And there was an article in the Houston Chronicle and Fort Worth Telegram and so forth. None of these are you really portrayed very sympathetically, I must say. There was an article in Fort Worth by Kira McCarthy, and everyone seems to be rather gleeful at your potential demise. But you have not demised. You're still here talking. I kind of want to go over some of the potential cases you have, because it seems like there are a few of them. Some of them are offensive against you, and some of them are your retaliation or different veins. And you have something against the FDA for some of the things they did here rather preposterously, associating an FDA-approved medication for humans as if it's only for horses, ivermectin and so forth. And I think you had a case in the appeals court that talks about the FDA not being able to do stuff like this, tweet and try to dictate medical care.
Yes, the FDA case came out of the whole ivermectin debate, but it goes way beyond just ivermectin. And the gist of it is the FDA is not your doctor, and they are not allowed to dictate how patients get treated for certain diseases. Their role is to approve medications for human use, monitor the accuracy of marketing statements towards drugs, but they don't have any say in, okay, you can, off-label drugs are allowed, and the estimates are about 30 to 40% of all medications are off-label, and they haven't gone after other drugs in this manner that have been used off-label. So right. And the other thing is the general public doesn't realize that they don't have the authority that they're pretending they have. So everybody cites the FDA as a reason why ivermectin can't be used for COVID, but they really don't have that power. But the general public doesn't know that.
Right. This is covering this is courthousenews.com. Fifth Circuit sides with sides with ivermectin prescribing doctors in their quarrel with the FDA. The FDA is not a physician. Willett, I presume is the judge, wrote in conclusion, has to inform, announce, and apprise, but not to endorse, denounce, or advise. The doctors have plausibly alleged that FDA's posts fell on the wrong side of the line between telling about and telling to. Even tweet-sized doses of personalized medical advice are beyond FDA's statutory authority. And so he's referring to these, horse, they had Facebook posts here. You are not a horse. You are not a cow. Seriously, y'all, stop it, says the colloquial, charming FDA on, I think it's just Facebook, and they're also on Instagram and so forth. Congratulations on this. How did you manage to pull this case off, and how did you organize and how did you get the strength to do it and or finances?
Well, it's me and two other doctors, Paul Merrick, who's one of the founders of FLCCC, and Bob Apter, who's a emergency room physician. All three of us have been penalized for using ivermectin. Basically board complaints, losing hospital privileges. So, we just came together and we were able to connect with a great law firm that was interested in the case, Boyd and Gray, and we have outside funding, so we don't have to use our own funds for it. So it just all came together very well.
Well, bravo. And is this a fait accompli? I mean, are there other appeals or Supreme Court or whatever?
Well, it's still going on. So basically, the case was initially dismissed. We appealed, and we won on appeal the right to move forward. So we basically had the motion to dismiss was overturned, and now we go back to most likely we go back to the district court and continue to fight.
Well, good luck to you, because this is very similar to the AB 2098 case in California, I believe. Where California wanted to make it such that if the board of medicine California says jump, then as a physician, all you have to do is say how high.
Mm-hmm.
They get to tell you what type of things do what, and your ability to judge medically is taken away.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Dr. Bhattacharya has been involved in that. But I'm glad you made that connection. I've interviewed previously Joe Verone and Kat Lindley, and I think they're associated with Dr. Merrick. Are you familiar with them?
Oh, yeah. So Dr. Verone is a friend of mine because he's in Houston too, and Kat as well. She's a good friend. So, yeah, we talk a lot.
Excellent. So on your own personal basis, how has this affected your practice and or your pocketbook and or your kind of interest in continuing in medicine?
Well, it's a loaded question. I guess, the day-to-day, the biggest issue I have is getting access to ivermectin for patients affordable, because the pharmacies aren't filling it. I can send them to compounding pharmacies, but the insurance doesn't pay for it. And they're not always open on the weekends, that sort of thing. So that is a daily hurdle that I have to deal with. It has been utterly exhausting, I will say that, but it's been rewarding. So I have days when I'm definitely ready to retire, but I'm glad I'm on the side I'm on. I'm very
right.
I wouldn't do it over again.
Right. Well, God bless you. I appreciate the strength you've had. And on your own personal, Breathe MD practice, how has that affected, your flow of patients? Are you, I don't know, congratulated? Have you noticed an uptick, downtick as far as your own patient census?
Yeah, it goes up and down, and it's hard to say how it affected, because I was new. My practice had only been up for 6 months prior to the pandemic. And it's not as busy as it was during the pandemic, that's for sure, because everybody was coming to see me for COVID.
Mhm.
But it's, right now, I really just want it to be manageable, which is what it is right now, what it is right now. So um, during the pandemic, it was nearly unmanageable because the demand was so high.
Mhm. Well, good for you. Um, so as far as ivermectin treatment, it's hard to do. Anecdote, the plural. There's an old expression: the plural of anecdote is not data. Um, and so, if you've had your patients treat with ivermectin, it's hard to say whether they work or not because it's hard to say. Um, what are your feelings? What have you seen as validation of ivermectin as treatment for coronavirus? Do you think it was validated? And what's the current state of art or our knowledge about this?
Well, when you look at a meta-analysis, and there's a meta-analysis of 99 studies on ivermectin, the overall efficacy for early treatment is 62%. So, so it doesn't work, it's not the magic pill for everybody, but when you use it in combination with other drugs, I mean, like I said, I was worried because monoclonal antibodies, really, the efficacy was great. I mean, people turned around so quickly, and I was like, well, I don't know, this ivermectin is really going to do the same thing. And maybe it doesn't work as quickly, but when I used it with the other drugs and sometimes just ivermectin, but I kept everybody out of the hospital. And I know the mortality is low anyway, but when you've got 6,000 people, some of those people should have died if, under the normal regimen.
Very good. I'm going to interject here just for our viewers at home. This is from the FDA itself. This is the FDA.gov. And this is I guess, part of the summary of the approval of ivermectin. And, they had, I guess, 1,651 subjects in their initial study for approval of ivermectin. And so more than 1,500, and they found very, very few side effects. So over here, this is like, it's kind of dry stuff. I'm not going to really go into it too much, but no deaths were seen. They had 7.9% had adverse effects versus 6.4 in the placebo group. So it was not really, noticeably different from nothing, from taking nothing. So the stuff at the very least is safe. And so, just go to the top of the page here. This is, clinical review. This is 2011 for a particular type of ivermectin lotion. And similar things happened with the ivermectin pills and whatnot. So this is safe medication. HCQ similarly was safe and is long-term FDA approved. In fact, the inventor of ivermectin, I believe, got the Nobel Prize. I'm not sure how long ago. I think in the 90s. And so, awesome drug. Whether it works or not is an open question. But it was always one of those things where it's like, why can't we use this? It just doesn't seem to make much sense. Can you?
And that's before I started using it, because of all the hype around it. I went to the FDA and looked at the original study, and the LD50, which is a benchmark number to look at the toxicity of a medication. It gives you the concentration, how much of this will kill half the lab animals and mice. And the LD50 for mice and ivermectin is 25 milligrams per kilogram, and the doses we're giving is 0.4 milligrams per kilogram. So I also did a literature review to look for accidental or intentional overdose with ivermectin and couldn't find any studies. So once I was assured it was safe, then that's when I decided to start using it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I also have another page here on there's an article on off-label drug use. It's romantically called OLDU, like old you. But there's they have 10 separate paragraph headings, 10 common questions and their answers about off-label drug use. But just cut to the chase. It's a long-term, very well-known activity through medicine. And here's just a list of categories and drugs from allergy, cardiology, dermatology. I mean, it goes alphabetically, gastro, every single topic, infectious disease. And so it has some medications that we use off-label, and some of them are very, very commonly done.
Mhm.
Um, like you mentioned gabapentin. I've seen a lot of use of propranolol for stage fright amongst musicians and actors and whatnot, ball players and so forth. That's not, no study's ever been done to show that works. Tricyclic antidepressants have a lot of off-label usage. Um, you want to talk about that at all as a concept within medicine?
Yes, and I don't think and most doctors probably aren't even aware how much they do use off-label. I was looking at this list and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't realize it." So, yeah, it's very, very common, and, like, yeah, gabapentin actually I looked this one up because it seems to be a widely used medication. There are actually only 3 FDA-approved indications. Look at the off-label, and I found 22 off-label uses for gabapentin. So, and then in terms of ENT, looking at Prilosec, uses for reflex laryngitis. That one we do very commonly. Benadryl for insomnia. That's very common.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's not unusual, and why there's, but ivermectin apparently is an entirely different story for some
Yeah,
reason.
yeah. And then, I actually talked about this earlier with you in the kind of the converse aspect. Sildenafil, that's Viagra.
Hmm.
And Viagra was studied initially as um, a cardiac medication, akin to taking nitro. So it's a vasodilator, and it was to treat cardiac angina. And that's what basically it was. And then people noticed this other, kind of perking up of a certain different part of the anatomy, and off to the races. It's been a very fruitful medication. You know, I think there have been very few medications or classes of drugs that have had the positive acclaim that PDE5 inhibitors have had for male erectile dysfunction. And yet the whole essence of it is that it was off-label. It wound up having a secondary use that people had not expected. The whole kind of hair regrowth of the two basic major formulations, whether minoxidil, which is blood pressure medication, or finasteride, which is a prostate um, quasi-hormone, those were secondary use. I don't know if they're on the list right now because over time they were used off-label for hair regrowth, and eventually they got their own separate approvals, from the FDA. But the fact whether the FDA blesses something or not has nothing to do with whether it actually works. And they, of course, with their regulatory speed bumps, are way behind the times as far as determining those things. And doctors, right on the front line, such as you were, can make quicker determinations, and and should, frankly.
Right. I mean, it's the interaction with the patient is I mean, I learn so much. I mean, I still learn every day. Basically, you see how patients respond and you do that over and over and over again. And I feel like that, the studies, the FDA, the government, those are guidelines, right? But nothing takes the place of actually being there with patients, seeing them, doing it every day, multiple people a day. That has taught me far more than reading a journal or reading the FDA's website.
True, true. So let's see. As far what is your defense in the board of registration case or cases? How are you going about that? Have you had reasonable press coverage, PR? Uh, is how do you defend yourself, and how do you go on the offense, and is it productive?
With the medical board.
Hmm.
Um, so they offered to settle. So we had a little conference, they call it an informal settlement conference. They said all I had to do was pay them $5,000, retake the jurisprudence exam, which is a legal exam doctors have to take in Texas, which I already took, and then take 8 additional hours of continuing medical education. So I said no because I have nothing to hide, and I'm just going to take it further. And the next step, is a court where I can bring witnesses. Nothing is so in this informal settlement conference. Their expert witnesses were anonymous. They weren't there. They were writing stuff. um, it just wasn't a fair deal. And not,
Mhm.
this is still not completely fair, but at least there's more transparency to it.
So which level of court are you going to be? I mean, the board is a bureaucratic group, and I don't know if it's that much different in Texas, but if you appeal one of their findings, you have to go through here. You have to go through the Division of Administrative Law Appeals, not genuine
Exactly.
civil or criminal court. It's kind of a bureaucratic thing. Are you going to get to go into civil court? Uh,
Not unless I sue them, but it's not. But I don't
so
know.
you're still kind of adjudicator. You're in an adjudicator. I can't even say the word adjudicatory phase with the board on the bureaucratic level. Is that true?
Yes, I guess. I don't know
Yeah,
exactly what you mean by that, but yes, it's a different kind of court.
I agree. Um, so what's the take-home message for physicians and or your prior self? If Mary Talley Bowden um, uh, could talk to her previous self from 4 years ago, what would you say?
Mm, yes, that's a good question. I mean, I'm glad I fought back. It's been a challenge, but I'm glad I did it. I I think that I can live with myself, right? I don't know how the doctors on the other side who shut their doors to their patients. I honestly don't know how, especially primary care doctors, because as a specialist, I develop relationships with my patients, but not to the degree that a primary care doctor does, where they're seeing these patients for years. I do not understand how they didn't try to take care of their patients when they were sick. I just, it's really baffling to me. So I can live with myself. It has not been easy. I would still do it again. Um, I wish the whole thing had never happened, but here we are.
Right. Now, yes, speaking, I kind of coming back to my bookmark about monoclonals. I have an article from last year, which frankly was, in a sense, overdue even then. Um, I should put it up in a second here. Um, it's called "Is it Time to Accept that Omicron is not COVID-19?" Omicron came around in late 2021, and it is genomically not a direct descendant of SARS-CoV-2. So um, here's ancestral. This is COVID-19, as it were. These other ones, frankly, should be COVID-20 because they're not really COVID-19s. They're alpha, beta, delta, kappa versions of SARS-CoV-2, and they are genomically related. They're in all this kind of this little hive here of
Mhm.
branches coming off, or maybe a tree, I guess, with branches coming off the SARS-CoV-2. So alpha, beta, gamma, delta. So a bunch of Greek letters. They obviously skipped President XI, Chi. But Omicron is sui generis. It is of its own type. It came up spontaneously in southern Africa, and it's a coronavirus, and we've always had coronaviruses. This is a 1999 textbook, I believe. We've always had coronaviruses as part of the common cold. It's the second most named cause of the common cold after rhinovirus.
Mhm.
So I think we've made a category error by continuing to call Omicron COVID-19
Mhm.
when it's really Corona 23 or Corona 21 or whichever version happens to be. We come up with all these special super duper names. But to get to the monoclonal point, um, when 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 original SARS, we'll call null, SARS-CoV-2 came along, there was monoclonal antibody for that. So that's like a door lock with a key. Monoclonal antibody is going to fit in the door and work on that lock only. And then alpha and beta, those are slightly different locks. You need slightly different keys. So they have, each monoclonal is a key fit just for that one. So the alpha gets its monoclonal, beta, etc. I'm not sure what happened to gamma, but delta, and so forth. Each one has its own monoclonal antibody. As soon as that variant strain is gone, as soon as that lock is gone, they get rid of the key because
Mhm.
that key is no longer useful when there's no lock for which it will open a door. Yet the vaccine maintained its key for the ancestral version, which was long gone.
Mhm.
So the reason people keep coming up with this astounding response that, well, this vaccine doesn't work as well. Well, it's because that virus is long gone. It's gone. It won't come back. We have immunity to that in full. And each variant that comes along, we need new immunity to that if we care. But we've never gone to the trouble of vaccinating against the common cold. And we should really stop doing it against Omicron. What's your take on COVID-19 now? And kind of the remasking we're seeing. I've been watching some videos from Canada and the U.S. where people have their masks on. I mean, what's up with that? How do you see it?
I mean, so the only people that really come to me now with COVID are the higher risk patients that are still worried, right, that they're going to have some sort of issue. So I have seen an uptick in cases, but the people that are coming to see me are the older people. They have a bad diabetic, that sort of thing. But it's not going down here like it did before. I mean, I used to prescribe a nebulizer for everybody. I mean, almost everybody. I would send it, just have it on hand at your house, just in case.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't feel compelled to do that. And I just had a conference call with 15 other doctors. Most of those doctors are seeing patients in their clinic, and none of us are seeing the severity that we once saw. So I completely agree about, why are we vaccinating against a variant that no longer exists? It makes absolutely no sense. And if they really want to invest all this money, they should invest in monoclonal antibodies for each new strain. But even that is overkill at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you want to do that for the common cold, that's fine. But again, it's always been categorically coronavirus, a common cold. I mean, literally, that's the category of disease. 1999 textbook defines coronavirus. I could probably come up with that one as the common cold. So I think this link. Well, this is from the Harvard Medical School Student Review, but I've got another one in the article from a textbook. Anyway, it doesn't really matter here, but that is definitionally what coronavirus has always been, and everyone's always shocked that. Actually, I didn't post it. I apologize. This is what it. I mean, it's just silliness. I think the real problem is that the test has bled from SARS-CoV-2 and was probably not specific enough. And then anybody with a coronavirus extant, and again, a lot of common colds are that, show positive for that. So we have all these lives kind of upended periodically, even now, 2023, when somebody shows positive for the common cold, which happens to be one of the coronavirus common colds. And then we go through this whole lunacy cycle of people reporting it on TV, and nobody ever comes to the fact that Omicron is not even related to that. It's just kind of weird to me. Anyways, I'm going to leave that aside. So what, how have you taken up the public mantle? What has been your experience on, say, social media platforms and whatnot, and what kind of voice and message do you like to leave?
Yeah, in terms of social media, I've been mostly on Twitter. I was kicked off for 5 months, but that's that and LinkedIn. I like to post, and I have mixed. I think it's a necessary evil because I think we're in an information war, and I feel like it gives people hope to know that there are people fighting, because you look at the comments from people and the stories, and so many people were traumatized by the way COVID was handled. And in terms of the way, I get a little feisty sometimes, but that's part of my personality. I'm calm most of the time, but I do get feisty. And it seems like a lot of people think it's a complete waste of time, but I think, the more that we talk about, it's a different type of war that we're in, because, we've got the media, the mainstream media is censored all of us and blocked us. And so we're really just fighting to get information out to the people.
I'm wondering if you might want to just personalize one of your cases for us. The Houston case involved a police officer. Do you want to talk about what that was and why you were there and on whose behalf?
So Jason Jones, he was actually in Dallas, and he was on a ventilator. He'd been in a coma for a month. Hospital was talking hospice, and his wife wanted him to try ivermectin. Prior to going to the hospital, he tried to get ivermectin but couldn't. So, there was that history that we knew the patient also wanted it. And so the hospital would not do it. So she sued the hospital. And as part of that lawsuit, she asked me to help and be the expert witness. And they had to have a doctor willing to write the actual prescription for the ivermectin. So that's basically what happened. And we won initially, and we were told we had a court order saying, yes, Dr. Bowden, basically the hospital was told to grant me privileges. They created a lot of roadblocks in that, and they denied my privileges, even though they had a court order, and I had a clean record. There was nothing, I have no malpractice suits, no disciplinary, and at that time I still had a good reputation. So they denied my privileges, and there was all this back and forth. But anyway, so finally we got the go-ahead to go give him ivermectin. The hospital refused to use one of their nurses to give it, so we had to find a volunteer nurse to actually administer the ivermectin. As soon as we won, though, the hospital appealed, and they claimed there was a stay on the order. And when the nurse showed up, but our lawyer said there was not a stay. There was this conflict about that. Nurse shows up at the hospital, and the police are there and make her leave. And then we go back to court, and then we lose on appeal. And so he was never technically allowed to get the ivermectin. And then the hospital turned me into the medical board, saying, and they're making it sound like I tried to prescribe one of their patients ivermectin without having privileges, but it was under a court order. And then he actually made it out of the hospital, but then he passed away in April this year. He just had a really hard time recovering.
So when did the hospital hospitalization? It was October 2021. Yeah. So how much of a delay was there in his getting the care that he desired?
Well, he never got it. Oh, you mean initially or while he was in the hospital?
So you were unable to give him the ivermectin in hospital. Is that how it transpired?
Right. Never got. I mean, his wife did apply it topically. She snuck it in there, but they actually wrapped a towel around his feeding tube and put a rubber band around it to try to prevent her from sneaking stuff in.
Does she have a case against them?
I've talked about it with her, but I think she's worn out. They have 6 kids, and it's, she went through a lot. I don't know if she's ready.
Huh. So, I have to say that you get misrepresented. This is going to, fortunately you're sitting down for the shock, that you get misrepresented in the press. I've read the case a few different times in the Houston Chronicle and the Fort Worth Telegram, if I have the newspapers correct. And it makes it sound as if you kind of barge in. Exactly. It's like a bar fight. You storm in with your fake nurse and you want to like give the patient, something against his will and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But you were invited and you were allowed to come in. You had privileges. Then the hospital says, oh, she didn't have the right kind of privileges. She would have had to reapply for, some other special. It sounds as if they were making kind of after the fact, moving the goalposts and so forth, which is.
Well, I've tried to put it out there. I mean, I have the court order. I have it all in writing. It's on. I have a Substack that describes the whole thing. So it's completely ridiculous for them to portray it like that, because it was a judge who approved the whole thing.
All right. So we're kind of rounding out the hour a little bit here. I'll leave it up to you. What topics or messages do you want to leave to the audience?
I think the most important thing going forward is to realize that what is out there now is mild, and we don't need to get anxious about the current strain. The current variant is not seeing anybody that's on the verge of going to the hospital, and there's no point in getting a shot that is aimed at a variant that no longer exists. So I strongly discourage anybody from getting any more shots at this point.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm very much honored to have had you on, and I appreciate your time. I make a minor self-promotion at the end. Generally speaking, this is my book. It's about the last previous pandemic. People have forgotten probably Zika microcephaly. My book is out in Brazil now as well. And it's called Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. You can buy it on Amazon if you want to help support the podcast. It's got a picture of me on the front there. And there's, really a fascinating story of an aggrandizement and misunderstanding of events. And basically, long story short, is when decisions are made in panic, they are not made well.
Yeah, I remember a friend of mine she delayed getting pregnant because of that virus.
It's sad. The cost of this kind of uproar is not obviously visible, but there have literally, my gross estimation is there are probably about 1 million what I call ghosted children. That is to say, children that you won't see or ever meet because they were denied the chance to be alive because of this fear and panic. WHO had physicians aligned with it kind of spread a gospel message throughout Latin America that women should hold off pregnancy until they had a Zika vaccine. Now, checking my watch, it's almost 8 years later, and there's no Zika vaccine. So there would be nobody in elementary school practically for the next 5 years if people had listened to these quote unquote experts. So, I like to stipulate that Zika is an actual virus. There are 4 dengues, and Zika is kind of a little baby sister. If they were, they're named 1, 2, 3, and 4, and Zika would probably be dengue 5 if it actually were a human illness. So it exists, and probably, amongst monkeys and chimps and whatnot, causing problems perhaps. So it's an African virus, just like dengue was, and it doesn't cause any human illness at all. And then there were some reports of microcephaly possibly being on the rise in one town, city in Brazil, Recife, in 2015, but nobody really validated because they had no backward data. They had no registry of microcephaly. They had no firm standards of measuring. And so somebody who had been on the hunt for a new virus in Brazil for its own treacherous, weird reasons, because they wanted money and attention to go to the poor northeast of Brazil. So they actually had formed a group called Chikungunya Virus, the Mission, and their mission was to bring a new virus to Brazil so they could treat it and get attention and money. And lo and behold, it wasn't chikungunya that cooperated, but Zika, which may have in fact been just dengue all along. Anyway, so it's just a weird, bizarre story of confabulation and conjecture that got whipped up into a frenzy, and then it's called science. And so somebody from part 1, where the hunt for Zika, happened to live in Recife, where part 2 in August, some women thought there were maybe twice the number, like instead of 7 to 8 cases in the town at any given time, there were about 13 to 15 cases of microcephaly. They called that an epidemic of microcephaly. And they said, and so Carlos Brito, who had been part of 1, said, oh, this must be from that. And he found 30 mothers of microcephalic babies. He called them up. He said, after the fact, did you have any rash, fever, chills during pregnancy? There were no Zika tests at all. And if they said yes, and a lot of them did, because frankly, it's tropical Brazil, he said, oh, that was Zika. And that was the science and then it was whipped up and leaked to the press and turned into a huge frenzy. And nobody's backed down from any of this stuff. And so it's been left to just, this guy to come up with this. And it was not my life plan or anything like that. I'm not an ID guy, infectious disease or anything like that. I've never been to Brazil. And I've never seen Zika or dengue. But in fact, the science is there. There's been no Zika-related microcephaly ever since. And yet nobody backs down from it. They're still working on a Zika vaccine. They're injecting and infecting women in Baltimore right now as we speak in order to get a Zika vaccine. No doubt once they have one, it'll be mandated, just like these other things have been mandated around the world for people to get needlessly kind of diverting attention from genuine medical problems like malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, and so forth. So it's kind of this kind of pharma, vaccine, big public health, big pharma regulatory capture cycle that we've seen, where everything is kind of grooved and tilted towards a new vaccine. And that's really tiresome. Frankly, that's the underlying story of the ivermectin prohibition, I believe, as well.
Right. I believe so too.
Anyway, that's a mouthful. Sorry. Thank you for listening to my Zika story.
Well, I'm going to go buy that book now.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. And do you have any books out yourself? Are you going to have a book of your story?
Nah, well, maybe if I ever have time. I don't have time right now, but at some point.
All right. Well, we'll have to have the
It's
video.
a happy ending.
All right. Well, you have a lovely rest of the day, and thank you so much for your work and effort and bravery. And God bless you, and carry on.
Thank you so much, Randall.